The gifted. Everyone, one way or another, possesses a unique gift. It's up to us to find out our talent. Mostly, people use these gifts to soar themselves to success. That's just what Markesan did. Going on 25, he had a steady career in the news business. What soared him to the top so quickly? His uncanny ability to catch a story. Most news stations can report the aftermath when everything is said and done. But Markesan always had live footage of how the incident occurred in the first place. This includes a huge number of murders occurring in the city. Whether someone is brutally slashed, stabbed, or shot to death, Markesan and his crew are always there to record the footage. It always happened in the middle of another story, so Markesan could explain why there wasn't enough time to help the victims. People in his news media are a little jealous. They have to work for nearly 20 years to achieve the same fame he has. There's even talk of Markesan having his own talk show. After work, he decided to go home. His apartment was dark, even with the lights on. In his room, he flips a second switch. It didn't light the room. Instead, it lit up what appeared to be a mini replica of the city he lived in. A complete model of every streetlight, apartment house, hospital. Even all the restaurants and gas stations were there. Markesan's room alone was 5 times bigger than an average house. However, the model still took up almost the entire space. What was even creepier is that he has toy models of every person in the city, and they were placed exactly where they were supposed to live. He had stacks of phone books that he frequently updated on the other side of the room. The very next day, around 8 at night, Markesan and his crew were reporting several traffic lights broken around the city. Just then, a man came out chasing his wife with a chainsaw. Before the news crews had any time to react, the woman fell to the ground, screaming in a panic. The husband hacked her into pieces, right in front of everyone. Flesh and tissue tore from the woman's bones as she reached out for help. Her nails broke off completely as she used them to struggle over to safety. The crew did not even try to come close to him. The man had a chainsaw. The crazed man shouted out, "It wasn't me. It wasn't me." Then, in a horrific manner that looked like suicide, the man raised the electric saw up to his neck and began cutting his own head off. Both of their bodies covered the streets red in just seconds. Markesan's expression was a little awkward. He just turned around to his crew and said, "Did you get that?" That night and every night after, Markesan and his team were the most watched news station in the state. They also became the highest paid, so Markesan went on vacation and brought along a camcorder. At first, it just looked like he was recording a fun, normal trip on the beach. Soon, a boy, couldn't have been any older than a teenager, was walking funny and screaming at everyone. He looked petrified beyond belief, as if he had been crying for so long, his eyes no longer had tears to cry from.
"Someone stop me,"
he said.
"I'm not walking on my own. It's the invisible strings carrying me. Break my legs. Somebody help. I didn't write the suicide note. I didn't write it."
No one paid any attention and stayed away, assuming it was some twisted prank the teen was doing for kicks. He started to walk over to a cliff that is constantly guarded by security called Dead Man's Gorge. It's so high up that even with the depths of the ocean, no one has been able to make a dive and live to tell the tale. The teen's hands clenched onto a car door in panic, but the handle just broke off in his hands.
"Break my legs!"
He cried out once more. 2 officers walked up to the teen to steer him away. As the officers grabbed him, the boy reached for their guns and fired at one of them. One of the guards fell and was dead before he even reached the ground. The other officer backed away and, in almost a reflex motion, fired his entire clip into the teen's face and chest. The boy just looked at him, bleeding through all his clothing. The young man looked lifeless, but was still standing. He raised the gun up and fired at the guard, shooting from the leg up. The screams ceased once the boy shot him through the head. However, The teen couldn't scream, even if he wanted to. His voice box had been shot. He stumbled slower over to the cliff ahead and dropped, his body torn apart from the jagged rocks. The bizarre murders did not stop there. Less than 2 weeks later, around 8 o'clock, a man set fire to his neighborhood with a blowtorch. A few blocks down, a crazed woman was gouging people's eyes out with a hot poker. First, she would start by tying her victim's hands and feet to the edge of a table, then used a nail gun to shoot the nails into various parts of their bodies. The whole time she shouted, "Why are you making me do this? Why?" One night, while Markesan was about ready to go to sleep, he got a phone call. He tried to ignore it, but the calls kept coming. Then he got annoyed and removed the phone cord from the wall, but the phone still rings. This wasn't by his doing, so by fear and curiosity, he finally picked it up. "I know what you're doing," the voice said. It sounded like a harsh elder man was talking. "I know what you're doing." It had been years, but soon Markesan knew exactly who it was. It was the gypsy that taught him everything he knows. "I'm warning you," he continued. "You made a vow that what I teach you would never use to harm anyone. You're using blood money to get rich off of other people's death. It's barbaric. It stops here. For the next vile act you do will seal your fate." "I'm not afraid of you," Markesan yelled back. "Those people were never going to amount to anything anyway. Way I see it, I did them a favor. Threaten me with your petty magic. Your power is nothing compared to mine." Then he slammed the phone over across the room and went to sleep. Before he arrived at work the next day, Markesan woke up extra early to set up his modeled city. He added strings to every student that was going to be on bus 174. He used a type of fishing string and laced it around their hands and feet. He smiled and said quietly, "If the whole world's a stage, I'm simply writing a few scripts. I'm going to put on a performance of a lifetime." He laughed menacingly. Markesan had different tasks on other buses that he would use for later. He knew that his story alone would make his legacy immortalized forever. His stories would reach globally because the very next day, almost every single school in the city's district was suffering in one way or another. Since Markesan couldn't possibly be at every single school at once, he had video recorders hidden in every school and bus. The bus drivers looked as if they were driven mad and ended up smashing their vehicles right through the schools. Half the kids flew right out of their seats. The worst act, however, was yet to come. Every single remaining student in all the districts had explosives in their backpacks. Their eyes showed fear, but their mouths said nothing. That's because on Markesan's model, he sewed all their mouths shut. Rope was tied to their hands and feet in the model. They were tied right to the desk and couldn't move because of the strings. They sat in pure terror, with increasing anticipation of the outcome. Tears rolled down their faces, knowing that their fates were moments away from being sealed. But it's strange. Markesan looked at his watch while telling a random story on the news. He explained about all the potholes next to the schools. An hour passed and nothing happened. Markesan looked frantic and could not continue his story. The kids got feeling back in their hands and feet and rushed out of the school. What the hell happened? He said to himself, "My greatest story ever, ruined." Everything was now beginning to fall down on Markesan. He just got too careless. The police questioned why he would have cameras in the schools during a time when so many tragedies occurred. Even more suspicious was the fact that he knew where every single death was going to happen. Finally, authorities went into his house with a police warrant, but Markesan was nowhere in sight. His second mistake was getting everything custom-made. Nearly everything he owned, including vehicles and jets, had his name engraved on it. He couldn't use these because it would make him too easy to spot. So the only thing he could do was stay somewhere no one would ever expect him to be and lay low. That place was the cemetery. At night, he would just sit next to the grave and never utter a word. The silence of death around him began to disturb him. It almost sounded like faint voices in the distance. Markesan, the voices said. At first it just sounded like a whisper, but then grew closer and louder. Markesan, Markesan. They spoke once more. Fog started to lift out from the ground and formed a shape. The shape it took was a spitting image of the man that gave him this power. Markesan leaped to his feet. Chills ran down as if he had seen a ghost. The image of the gypsy spoke. I warned you what would happen. I took away all your power. So that's why you came, to take my power away? Markesan questioned. The gypsy paused for a few moments, then looked out the corner of his eye and smiled. They're coming for you, he said. They're coming, and they have experienced many ways of torture that they wish to share with you. Markesan stepped back and screamed, Who's they? Your victims. They have waited for you here, the old man responded back. Without warning, caskets rose from the ground. A head rolled out of one casket. It had no eyes, but still pointed in Markesan's direction. Another grave opened up, and this time a torso stumbled out and connected into the head. Then yet another grave popped open, with severely burned arms that crawled over to the torso. Two legs with almost no flesh latched onto the torso. The body began to slowly stand up. Markesan watched in horror now. Inside, he was praying someone would find him. He didn't care if he spent his whole life in prison. I'm sorry, he cried. But the gypsy had no remorse for Markesan. You should have been sorry for all the lives you took, for the loved ones that will never get their family back. The gypsy's eyes rolled back and blood ran down his face. Every night for the rest of eternity, your victims will judge your punishment. They will chomp on your bones. They will scream out for daytime only because the worms eating your flesh all afternoon won't be anywhere near as painful as they pry, ripping out your organs for supper in the nighttime. You're going to beg to die because even hell would show more mercy than your victims. One final casket opened and two eyes rolled out. The eyes rolled up to the dead body and lunged into the sockets. No, 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 get away, don't get any closer, Markesan yelled. The feet moved the torso and the shoulders used the hands to chase after Markesan. It was indeed feeding time. So if you ever come by a deserted area at night and you see or hear someone being eaten alive, it would be wise to run. If you don't, Markesan's victims might come after you next.